So this idea of attention residue is indeed very intrinsically, very connected to our ability to transition attention. And that if we want to be performing well in the present, we have to let go.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Lawrence Mpofo. Today we're here with Dr. Sophie Leroy, who's the Assistant Professor at the University of Washington, Bothell Business School. Today we're going to discuss her theory called attention residue, but I'll let her tell you more about that in the show. You should listen to the show if you want to know more about what attention residue is, how people can overcome the effects of digital distraction, and why our attention doesn't follow us when we switch tasks. But first off, welcome to Digital Mindfulness. We bring together the best teachers and thought leaders to share resources on how to be your best self in an age of digital distraction and information overload. If you're new here, then the best place to find out more about us is to visit digitalmindfulness.net/start, which has a collection of some required listening podcasts where we discuss everything from becoming more focused in a distracted world to habit building, overcoming digital distraction, productivity, internet addiction, online influence, and much, much more. Okay, enjoy the show with Dr. Sophie Leroy. Sophie, welcome to the show and thanks so much for coming on to Digital Mindfulness.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to talk about this.
So, Sophie, let's start at the beginning. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and particularly your journey to focusing on these innovative ways of productivity and attention in the workplace?
I have to bring you back to late 90s, that long ago. It was a long journey. So when I was working in consulting, we would be, I would be working in teams, and as part of our work, we would be interviewing just top executives, analysts who were focused on corporate branding, corporate strategy. And I would be sitting in those conference calls, and then when they would be ending, oftentimes people would say, hey, it's too bad, but this person did not address this point, or we forgot to ask this questions. And then the rest of the team would say, no, we actually talked about it for close to 5 minutes. And so it started to really puzzle me of like, wow, we've been sitting in, and attending the same conference call, and yet we're paid attention to different information. And it seems that at some point in time, all of us are actually checking out. And so I would organize after this conference call, after this realization, some debriefing where we would compare notes. And then I started to be really intrigued about then what are we thinking about when we're not present psychologically, right? We're physically in the room, but psychologically we're not present for some part of those interviews. And, just observing myself, talking to the people in my teams, it really occurred to me that people were really focused on the things that they forgot to do before coming to the meeting, or the thing that they wanted to do after the meeting ended, and that they just were constantly pulled towards the past, what they should have done, and towards the future, what they would need to do next, and had just such a hard time focusing on the present. And what is interesting too is we're talking late 90s, 2000. At that point in time, we would go to those meetings with a notepad. We did not have cell phones that had access to the internet. So it was not due to the technology, but it was really our brain not being able to sustain focused attention for a very long time. And I just kept reflecting on it. And so once I moved back to academia and was doing my dissertation, I really, really wanted to understand why is this? Why do we have such a hard time being in the present, closing the past, closing the future, and focus when it really matters? Because those interviews were critical, right, for our work. And so that's where all that idea of focused attention, sustained attention, being psychologically present, all those ideas came from those experiences that I had, working in teams where we all had to manage multiple projects. We were all part of multiple teams. And so I think it's a realization that the way we work and the way work is structured, in a way, is making our brain go completely crazy. And we underestimate the difficulty that we have in managing all those open windows.
So, would you say then, Sophie, that it really is just the way we structure our work that causes us not to be present and as effective in our work as we could be, that we're always thinking of the future or the past?
I think it's an interaction, right, between how our brain functions, what it can do, and the fact of the reality that we have to manage. All of us have multiplicity of responsibilities to manage, whether it's at work or outside work. I think there's just so I think it's more linked to our brain in that context. And, I think, for example, we often assume as we move from one task to the next, one project to the next, one meeting to the next, that as we move, our attention will follow us. But what my research shows is that we are not good at that, that in fact, the brain has a hard time closing, has a hard time letting go of what we were doing. When you set a goal, in a way, you open a new window on your mind, and it's an activity that will have to be done. Steps have to be taken to complete that goal. And the brain has a hard time dealing with all those open windows. In part because we have limited cognitive resources. And so, that's part of the story, that when we have all those open windows, then we slow down, we don't process information as carefully, but also implicitly we have this fundamental need for completion. And so when things are not completed, when we have not reached a point that is satisfying, our brain is going still to process those things. And so that interferes with the present.
I think that's really important and also fascinating that our attention doesn't follow us, because I think certainly for me, before I started on this journey, I really thought that our attention was just something that we had, and it was just a question of willpower, whether I could harness it or not. But you're saying that our attention actually doesn't follow us from task to task. And this is really the idea behind the attention residue, the paper that you published years ago, and that's received a lot of media attention. But would you say that this is the whole idea behind the attention residue, the idea that our attention doesn't follow us as we switch from task to task?
Yes. Yeah. So the idea behind attention residue is that the thoughts about a task easily intrude and while we perform other tasks, and that we have a hard time indeed closing on tasks or events, whether they are past events or past tasks or upcoming ones. So that's the idea of interference. And it's very important because, again, we have limited cognitive resources, and I often describe the brain as being this very old computer. And if you remember older computer, when you open too many windows, too many programs, it would really slow down. And in many ways, the brain does the same thing, right? And so if you're constantly distracted by all those open windows, all these other tasks you have to perform, then you don't process information as carefully in the present. You miss information. And so the quality of your work will suffer. The quality of the decisions you're going to make is also going to suffer. So this idea of attention residue is indeed very intrinsically, very connected to our ability to transition attention. And that if we want to be performing well in the present, we have to let go of other things, and we have to be able to close on what was past or close on what we anticipate, at least temporarily, right? Because as we have goals, we have to also anticipate. But when we care about performance in the present, we have to train our mind to be more focused. And part of the answer is, how do we manage those transitions between tasks? I think a lot of people If they have a meeting at 3 o'clock, they're going to work until 2:59, drop everything, and then rush to their meeting, not realizing that in doing so, they don't allow the mind to close. And they take their brain for granted, right? They really assume the mind will follow me, and it does not. And so I think it's that realization that we have to manage this transition as much as we have to manage our performance in a given moment in time.
I really love that because I'm not sure that many people are aware that there is even a transition in between the different tasks that we do. And it sounds like what you're talking about is this space in between the different tasks that we do, in between email and our actual tasks or looking at our phones.
Yes, absolutely. And so we don't we don't think of those transitions as important. But we think of those transitions as void in a way, right? As non-existent event. But in fact, there are opportunities for us to be more effective by helping again our brain transition. There's something, for example, on the radio. I don't know if you've noticed where I listen to NPR a lot, and oftentimes they have music between segments. And I've often asked myself, that's interesting. Why do they have music? But then it occurred to me that through the music segment, my brain can slowly close on the topic that they were just talking about, right? And as they start something new, I had time to kind of process the information, make sense of it, and get it to a point where I can let go. I can be satisfied, right? I've integrated some of those ideas, and so I had room in between to manage the transition. And I think it's going to be my research has suggested that those transition, creating them as an opportunity for the mind and preserving them is very important.
Everything you've just spoken about really are mindful principles, and this whole idea of being in the present when we're doing our work so that it becomes our best work, I think is really, really important. But there are so many practitioners of mindfulness meditation who have trouble themselves staying in the present moment. So how would you recommend workers themselves let go of thinking about what might happen in the future or what happened in the past and be here now, be present for their work?
Right. So first, it's a realization that this is just a temporary letting go, right? Right. It is like, okay, I know I have to focus on this task when I'm going to be done with this meeting, but right now, the next 5 minutes, the next 10 minutes, I'm just going to focus on what I'm supposed to do in the present because I really care about my performance on this task. So I think there are different things. One, realizing how by not closing, by being pulled, you're going to undermine your performance. So just a pure realization, right? Two, as you work on something, let's assume it's a task A, right? And then you're going to move to a meeting. Instead of rushing through those transition phase, just take a moment to think about, okay, what did I do on this task? What did I accomplish? What am I going to do next? Kind of reflect on it before you transition. Give the opportunity to your mind to close. But close is, right, it's not I'm dropping things off. It's not I'm just rushing out. It's more what can I do to feel comfortable stopping on this first task so that I can actually be open and available in my meeting. And so it's just taking that time. I think we're just so time urgent. We're so pressed for time that we're just rushing a little too much from one thing to the next, and allow for this breathing moment where actually the brain does some work in just making sense of what we've done, making peace with it, right? And making maybe a plan for what you'll do next.
What effect, Sophie, do you think that being constantly connected and constantly notified has on us? And has on our ability to stay in the present with our work. Do you think that there's a role that digital has to play to kind of bring us into the present? Because the digital present is really noisy and very confusing, and that might be something that contributes to us not being our best work selves.
So maybe two things. One is on the transition. The other one is maybe more generally speaking. On the transition aspect, I think a lot of us, and me included, use those transitions to, the fact that we are bringing our work with us at all time makes us manage those transitions are actually work time, right? So as you leave your office and you go to your meeting, you're on your phone, still typing emails, still checking emails. And so it's right? Those transitions are absorbed into being work opportunities as opposed to closing opportunities, right? And so there's just absolutely no space for the brain to reflect, close, move on, right? That process. So that's one. I think more generally, I don't think that the technology has caused us to be has caused the brain to be split constantly, but has made it easier for the brain to move away from the present because you can at all time re-engage with the task you were doing because it's readily accessible through your phone, through your computer, and all those things, right? And it also really makes the future task available and accessible because I can, log in and actually even, let's say, I have to send an email to Lawrence at the meeting. Well, why don't I do it right now during this meeting, right? And so your future task becomes your present task, but not realizing that you're not then paying attention to what's going on anymore, right? And so I think it's amplified the phenomenon. Instead of the brain just thinking about the past or the future, the technology allows us to engage in those tasks right now and make it even worse.
I think this is fascinating because in a lot of the work that we've been doing here on technology and work-life balance, it's really interesting the way that digital devices, and the online world the way they compress time and space. And space, right? So the way you were saying that your future task becomes your present task,
right?
And the present becomes much busier, becomes a much more stressful place, and time becomes collapsed, right? So when you're at home, out of the office, and perhaps your focus should be on something else, your loved ones or whatever. You just think I can do a bit more work, right? So space and time gets collapsed, and that. From everything I've read, and certainly from your work, which is fascinating, that this doesn't help us to do our best work or help us be our best selves.
Absolutely. And I think, as you said, people do realize that they can't multitask, but at the same time, in those moments, I think they still think they can, right? Oh, I'm going to just send that email, but I'm still paying attention. No, you're not, because your brain cannot. From the moment where your brain is focusing on writing that email, you're not processing the information that is shared around you or presented to you. Your brain can physically, cognitively not do that. But I think people will still, I would say, fooling themselves that with the idea that they can. And what the digital world, like all those devices and the technology, what it has done is or at least it has increased the temptation to engage in things that are pulling us away from the present, the work we're actually supposed to do, right? And in so doing, it really hurts indeed, as you said, the quality of what we produce, the quality of the interactions we have with people. If you think about it outside of work, indeed, with our loved ones, we're not as present, we're not emotionally as attuned because we are halfly there, right? And so I think what is hard also is because there are temptation. Yes, I know I need to send this email to Lawrence, and I need to do this before the end of the day. it's a temptation. Do I do this now? Do I do this later? Can I delay it? It bugs my mind. Okay, I'm going to engage in it. I'm going to do it now because in a way it feels more gratifying to complete this right away. And delaying the gratification of reaching completion on that item is hard. But yet again, we're missing things, right? And so I think it's a world in which people have to self-regulate a lot more, push away with temptation to engage away from the present. And in a busy world, sometimes we don't have the resources to say no to those temptations, right? They're not necessarily temptations like temptation that, to browse the internet and not be productive. They're productive tasks, but yet they are still interfering with what we're supposed to do in the present.
And you and I, we were talking in the pre-interview about this whole impact of temptation and our ability to self-regulate or to resist temptation. That it's a finite resource. It goes down. It doesn't increase during the day. It actually it decreases as the day goes on.
Absolutely, right? They compare, our self-regulatory resources is this muscle, and the more it's used, on one hand, the more we increase the pie over time, but within a single day, it gets tired. And so the more we use it, the less able we are to self-regulate. And so it's indeed a finite resource that gets depleted.
So would you say that the findings that you've come across in your work on the attention residue, would you say that these things apply outside of the workplace as well?
Yes, absolutely. Because I think it's not a function of a workplace; it's a function of a brain, right? And so you talked about how the work continues past a transition to our homes, for example, right? And so how our work interferes with our personal life. And I think the transition from work to not work sphere of our lives, that transition has to be managed in the same way. And if we don't, then we are letting work still, be present in our brain, and our brain will engage in it. And so I think that interface, that's where the work-life balance comes in. I think it's absolutely related to the idea of attention residue. I think it's a function of, from the moment where we have multiple things we want to accomplish and we have to move from one to the next, we'll have those challenges. So it doesn't matter if it's work or non-work.
So Sophie, what strategies then would you recommend to a constantly connected worker? How can they overcome some of the problems that you've identified with the attention residue?
So in addition to the transition, right, managing the transition, I think being more mindful in putting those devices away, consciously saying, no, I'm not going to bring my laptop and I'm not going to bring my cell phone to this meeting because I want to be present. Because, again, it's realizing that those are temptation, right? They're not just temptation. They are actually reminders of all the other things that we have to get done because it gives us access to those things, right? So that would be one. Another one that I think is less talked about is retraining our attention. And I think we've been evolving into being, having such a short attention span. And we have to retrain our attention to be able to sustain attention, sustain focus over long periods of time. And so it might be, okay, I'm going to read this document and I'm going to give myself 5 minutes where I'm not going to think about anything else. And you'll be surprised when most people are going to struggle in doing that and just sustaining attention for 5 minutes on one single thing, right? And I think as you give yourself a challenge to just stay focused and realize, oh my God, my attention is going into another direction again, and then bringing it back. And then as you master those 5 minutes, then increase to 10 minutes. And I think and then 15 minutes. And you'll be surprised of how much more productive than you are by retraining your attention, retraining focus. So it's kind of looking at it from the other angle. I've talked first about how, our previous and upcoming tasks are pulling us away from the present. And so how to manage those transitions to close, to make the past and the future less pulling. The other tactic is how to help us then being more engaged in the present by retraining our focus, by retraining our ability to sustain that focus, and retraining the brain that it does not have to worry about all those other things that are going on, that it can wait 4 or 5 minutes. But we have to, I think we have to retrain ourselves because our world is not asking us to do this anymore and is rewarding, in fact, right, all the more multitasking kind of behavior.
So since publishing this work, Sophie, I'm really interested about you. How good are you now at spotting and managing your own attention residue and the different information stimuli that come into you?
I wish I could say yes. The difference is it might be my awareness, right? I think I fall back to, I constantly go back to old habits, and then I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing, right? And I need to be better with this, and experimenting with myself strategies that are helping me, that may not be strategy that necessarily help other people. Being very cognizant, for example, right, as an academic, writing is critical, and knowing when I have a easier ability to sustain attention, and for me it's in the morning, and protecting that time as much as I can so that I have those uninterrupted hours where I can focus and be really kind of have a flow experience. And so, but am I mastering this? No, but I think it's trying new strategies, turning off my phone, turning off my emails, and just protecting my morning, for example. Knowing when I have the luxury that I can also work from home from time to time, and this just knowing, okay, if I work from home, I'm going to be more productive. But also knowing that actually some days where if I work from home, I have so many things at home that I have to take care of, I'm going to have to leave the house because I won't be able to focus, right? So for me as well, exercise has been so critical. If I don't exercise, then it has a direct impact on my attention. And so I'm not sure what the linkages are, but I think the people who tend to enjoy exercising and think it's important and have always done it also have seen an impact on their ability to focus.
So my penultimate question is something I ask all my guests, and that is, in this age of constant connectivity and information overload, what would you say are the most important human traits, and how do we cultivate those?
So I do think being aware of how the context affects you, right? Because as we interact with this digital world and all the, we don't know actually what the interfaces will be like in 10 years. We don't know what the devices will do, right? But I think we have to keep being aware of how they affect us, our lives, our way of thinking, the quality of our interactions with other people, the way we process information, what it does to our brain and our emotions. So awareness is one. Never forgetting that there's nothing that will ever be the same, at least for me, is a face-to-face social interaction. We see when we interact with people, our brain processes not just what they say, but so many more cues, right? Behavioral cues, and we give back. And I think in a digital world, it's easier to be a one way, and I think there's so much more richness in the social connection and the social interactions that are face to face. The third one I would say is it's an old concept in social psychology, is the importance of delayed gratification, the ability to delay gratification. And the old studies have shown that people who are better at delaying gratifications actually end up being more successful in their careers. But I think in a world that is pushing us to be constantly responsive, pushing us to do things faster, it also trains us to get everything that we want right away. And our ability as a society to wait for outcomes, our ability to be patient, our ability to delay that gratification, I think is diminishing. And I think being able to train ourselves that, no, I don't need to have the answer right away. It's not going to change the course of the world, and it can wait. And so if I'm comfortable delaying completion, delaying gratification, because in fact the outcome, it's not a crisis, then my behaviors are going to change. I'm not going to interrupt so many people and break their flow just because I need an answer right now. And so I think if we're, again, able to delay gratification a little bit more in how we function as human beings, and especially as it relates to the workplace, right? Then we will also respect people's concentration and flow and creativity to a greater extent. And so it might come from awareness, again, being aware that the digital world is making us more impatient, but it's oftentimes artificial, and that we have to respect our own attention as well as the attention of others if we really want people to be focused and present and do good stuff at the end of the day.
Wow, that was great. Sophie, unfortunately, we've come to the end. Where can people find out more about you and your work and connect with you?
So I guess for now, I work at the University of Washington, Bothell, and so my email is probably the best way. It's Leroy, SLEROY at uw.edu. I'm in process of creating my own website so that it's another venue for people to kind of find my work. But I'm happy to answer people questions and send my work that is written so far in a more academic way. But I'm also working on things that would be a little bit more accessible. So I'm happy to share that too.
Great stuff. Well, Sophie, thanks so much for spending time with us today. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, it was really a pleasure. I really enjoyed a discussion at any time. Happy to participate.
Thanks for being with us today. Remember, this show is part of a larger feature we have on tech and work-life balance, which you can get access to as a member of our new online community for only $12 a month. And this has premium content from the very best in the world on all things digital mindfulness. If you like this show, don't forget to reach out and thank Sophie. Her contact details are in the show notes. And if you find the podcast valuable at all, you can also support it through the website at digitalmindfulness.net/support. Thanks so much for listening. See you next week.